All languages have some pretty strange idioms and expressions. Why do people talk about the elephant in the room in English, for example? And Swedish is no exception. In Sweden, we talk about getting stuck with the beard in the mailbox and sensing owls in the bog. Today I'm gonna explore some of the strangest Swedish idioms I could find and also see if I can learn more about their origins. First of all, I'm not just gonna give you a couple of silly examples and leave it at that. There's enough of that on TikTok. No, I wanna see if I can find the etymology of these expressions. Why do we talk about pooping in the blue cupboard or that there's no cow on the ice? All of this and much more will be explained. But I also have to give a fair warning that some of these sayings and idioms are old, really old. That means that it's difficult to find an explanation for why the saying was invented. For some of these I found an official explanation, and for some I have a pretty good guess, but for some others... Anyway, let's get started with a pretty funny one, putting rhubarbs on something. In English, or in American at least, you can use the phrase bogart when talking about someone trying to grab something in a selfish manner. Hey, don't bogart all that cake, for example, even if that phrase was initially used for hugging other types of substances. In Swedish, we say Lägga rabarber på instead, which means to put rhubarbs on something. No, it doesn't make sense in Swedish either, not unless you're familiar with the idiomatic expression. This is an example of folk etymology. The original expression was actually the Spanish word embargo, to put an embargo on something. But people misheard it and somehow thought that the words embargo and rabarber sound similar. So ever since 1893, to put rhubarbs on something means to embargo it in Swedish. Ooh, so you attacked American ships in the Red Sea. Now you've really pooped in the blue cupboard. In Swedish, we don't say that you've made a faux pas or that you've done something bad. In Sweden, you have skitit i det blå skåpet instead. You've taken a crap in the blue cupboard. The expression became popular in 1981 when it was used by Janne Loffe Karlsson in the movie Göta kanal. He actually used it in another movie before that, in 47 löken blåser på from 1972, but I guess that no one saw that movie. Janne heard it from his father, who used to shout it at him whenever he misbehaved, but no one really knew why his father used that phrase in particular. There's a theory though, a paint theory. In the 1800s, the color Berlin blue started to be mass-produced, and people painted their fine linen cupboards in this new trendy color. So pooping in the blue cupboard means to take a dump on the fine linen. And that's not a good thing. Where there's a will, there's a way. That's a nice expression, isn't it? Well, an almost equivalent expression in Swedish would be finns det hjärterum så finns det stjärterum. And that means if there's room in the heart, there's room for the ass. It's commonly used when people squeeze together on a couch to make room for one more. There used to be similar but less crude versions in the 1800s and even earlier, such as where there's a heart, there's also shelter. But around 1940, this rhyming and cruder version became the standard instead. There might be a connection with heart signs typically being used on toilet doors, and the toilet is where you place your butt. Or maybe that's just reaching a bit too far to find some sort of connection. Either way, this phrase is used all over Sweden, so if you ever decide to visit Sweden, people are sure to make room for your ass. A favorite phrase of middle-aged men all over Sweden is "Här blir inga barn gjorda." No babies are being made here. It's typically used before going back to work after a coffee break, or when someone is leaving a group of people who are talking. The meaning is basically that nothing more is happening here, so let's do something productive instead. I tried to find information about when this phrase started to be used, but that turned out to be almost impossible. It's such a common phrase in Swedish that it's cluttering up all the search results. It's used in daily talk, in newspapers, in scientific papers. It's everywhere. I still wanted to include it here because it's such a funny phrase, and if you happen to know the etymology of it, please let me know. Another phrase that's a little bit difficult to find information about is när katten är borta dansar råttorna på bordet. When the cat's gone, the rats are dancing on the table. It's a pretty vivid and self-explanatory phrase, isn't it? When the supervisor is gone, everything goes bad because the workers are slacking off. Or when the parents are gone, then the kids start indulging in random arson and vicious torture of their siblings. The phrase has been used in its current form at least since 1865, but an older version exists as well from 1665. That one is, when the cat's gone, then the mouse dances on the table. So it's a very old saying, but that unfortunately means that we'll most likely never know exactly who coined it. But it's a phrase I love personally. During the Viking Age, a special type of moldy cheese was made up north. It's high in protein, and it smells a lot. Later on, this type of cheese was named gammelost, old cheese, because of the old-fashioned way of making it. And ever since 1790, this cheese has also featured in a very common Swedish saying, att få betalt för gammelost. The phrase means to get paid for old cheese, and I believe that most people in Sweden these days believe that it refers to any old cheese. In reality, it's referring to this very specific cheese from the Viking Age that was smelly and disliked. The meaning of the phrase is that someone will pay for what they did to you. Basically, someone gave you stinky old Viking cheese instead of the good stuff, and they'll pay for that. Oh, and as of 2022, there's just one producer of this type of cheese in the whole world. It's a small cheese producer in Norway. Those strange Norwegians. In English, you get caught with your hand in a cookie jar, but in Sweden you get stuck with your beard in the mailbox instead. Fastna med skägget i brevlådan was first used in 1959 in a Swedish translation of a British crime novel called Can Ladies Kill? The line, who will get hurt in the novel, was, for some reason, translated as, who will end up sitting there with their beard stuck in the mailbox. There might have been a method to the translator's madness, though. For a long time there's been a sailing idiom about getting your beard stuck in a block and ending up looking like a fool. So the author might have been trying to modernize the sailing phrase. But it could also have been used before that. One person wrote to a newspaper and claimed that he was the inventor of the phrase back in 1946. He was playing cards with friends during military service, and he used that phrase during that card game. One of those friends ended up using it in a play, and that bearded phrase then became famous all over Sweden, supposedly. But that story sounds a bit fishy to me. I sense owls in the bog about that explanation. Owls in the bog. What possible reason could there be for using that phrase if you're suspicious of something? Well, there is a reason actually, and I can blame the Danes for it. In the 1600s, there was a saying in Denmark, ulv i mosen, wolves in the bog. Basically, you suspect that there is something bad hidden. Since Danish is literally like a drunken Swede trying to speak with a mouthful of mashed potatoes, people in Sweden misheard that phrase as ugglor i mossen instead, owls in the bog. It wasn't really as far-fetched as it sounds though, because according to folklore, children who were murdered turned into a specific type of owl that could be found in bogs. Swedes like to use the phrase ingen ko på isen when they mean don't worry. It literally means that there's no cow on the ice, but that's just half of the expression. The full expression from 1578 is ingen ko på isen så länge rumpan är på land. No cow is on the ice as long as the butt is on dry land. Cows were often led down to lakes to drink, but those lakes froze during winter, and people were worried about the cows going through the ice. However, as long as the hind legs were on solid ground, the cows would be able to crawl back and rescue themselves if the ice broke. So as long as the butt is on dry land, then the whole cow isn't on the ice, and everything is fine. Now let's talk about bears. A bear hug, that's a good thing, right? It's a big squishy hug. That's the same in Swedish, by the way. A björnkram, that's a good thing. But in Sweden you can also get a bear favor, en björntjänst, and that's not a good thing. It's a well-intended thing that actually ends up causing you harm instead. But why is one bear thing good and one bad? Well, it all boils down to a French fable from the 1600s about a man who had a bear as a pet. They were sleeping one day and a fly landed on the master's nose. The bear wanted to get rid of it for him, so he smacked it and crushed his master's skull. It's a sensmoral about the dangers of keeping stupid but well-meaning friends. Interestingly enough, these days you sometimes find immigrants misusing this phrase. They mistake a bear favor for a big favor. Hey man, I'm really gonna do you a bear favor now. I'd rather you don't, please. And that's about it for this list of some of the most interesting Swedish sayings I could find. I hope you found it interesting as well. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day. Also, have a look at this video up here in the corner for more curious facts about Sweden.